And we're back. This is Reading Adam. I'm having a lot of fun making these videos right now. I'd like to keep doing it. So, today's video I want to talk about End of Education by Neil Postman. It's a book from the mid-90s. Neil Postman was a professor, and probably his most famous book is Amusing Ourselves to Death. He also wrote Technopoly. I read Amusing Ourselves to Death. I've read End of Education. I read Technopoly. I gotta make a video on Technopoly and Amusing Ourselves to Death another time. But for now, I just wanted to discuss End of Education. So, what does he mean by end of education? He means what's the purpose of education? Like he uses end in the way that a means to an end, or what means the end of, I don't know, I can't even describe it other than he uses it in a philosophical sense. What's the final purpose, not let's get rid of education. So, what do I remember from his book? The way I'm going to have this video go is I'm going to ask myself certain questions, and I'm just going to answer them as easily as I can. Question number 2, I'm starting with rather than question number 1. Question number 2, what do I remember from the book? The book, I don't remember a lot from it because there are lots of details, and I find that this is an issue with academic books. They read very nicely. It's very well written. He uses a ton of descriptive words. You can tell he's done a lot of research. His depth of knowledge is very great. His reasoning is sound. His arguments are logical. There's good flow to his writing. The chapters make sense. His summaries make sense. I wasn't really confused at any part of the book, but it's difficult to remember much from the book because of all the detail he uses. It's written beautifully, like he's a great writer. I would recommend reading him even if you just want to read good writing and good argumentation and something very academic. But I find that it's a bit of a flaw in that he explains too much. He kind of meanders and rambles a little bit. Not that he has disconnected thoughts, but his arguments might be too convoluted in a sense. Hard to follow is a way of putting it. And he doesn't just wrap everything up in a nice, neat little bow, because his purpose of the book is to start a discussion about the end of education, which is question number 4. So what do I remember from the book? Not a whole lot, because it was overly descriptive. I came away mostly with impressions rather than specific information or knowledge. Maybe that was the point. I don't think you don't need to know specifics from the book so much as the theory and general point of the book is question number 4, which is what discussion does Postman want us to have? He wants us to talk about, as a nation, what's the purpose of education? Why do we educate people? Now, my answer to why we educate people today is it's glorified babysitting. School exists to take the kids. School exists as free daycare. Not technically free because people are paying taxes, but school exists as free daycare for 2 parents who have to work. School primarily benefits parents. If you don't have children, you pay taxes for school, and maybe indirectly you benefit by having your population educated, but you don't even know why they're being educated, to what end are they being educated. But parents primarily gain benefit off of public school. Private school, they have to pay, and they do that because they believe in education more. They don't believe the public school will give as good education as private school. But parents benefit because They don't have to hire a babysitter. They don't have to pay for daycare, which is very expensive, even especially if you have multiple kids. Both parents can work during the day. Now, there's still going to be a lot of scheduling conflicts and issues, but in general, it makes it easier knowing where your kid is to be able to work during that time. So in my view, the end of education is it kind of lets people work and gives the kids something to do and calls it education. I don't want to do this too much, but I say education in a sarcastic way, just to kind of make everybody feel good about themselves. They feel like their kids aren't just horsing around and not learning anything. The kids are learning some things, but I feel like a lot of the reasons for why kids are there are kind of ridiculous. They're reasons that fall flat, I feel. So, and I think Neil Postman also feels that way. He doesn't buy the argument that education makes our population more economically productive. Our population more economically productive. So I agree with that. And he in his book cites evidence, a study or whatever done where it's been shown that the quality of education hasn't always translated into a better economy. And for example, the U.S. has ranked well below many other countries in quality of education. And I don't know if there's any controlling factors in terms of which part of our population, which race, which demographic, whatever. But in general, the quality of U.S. education is considered well behind many other developed countries, but yet the U.S. remains an economic powerhouse. So, whereas some countries might have very good education and a well-educated society, but they're not well off economically. Now, does education improve the economic outlook of a country? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe there's no correlation. Maybe there's certainly no causation, but maybe there's not even much of a correlation. I'll try not to take too many sips of water. I just don't want my voice. I want to sound more clear. I know I have a tendency to string words together, and it makes sense to me because I've already thought of the word I want to say, and I can't quite hear what I sound like, so I want to try to improve that by sipping on some water and keeping my tongue and mouth moist. I know you needed to understand that and hear those specific words. So, so the discussion he wants to have is, what's the purpose of education? Now, I've already told you what I think education actually is, which is glorified babysitting. And he says, okay, he doesn't buy the argument that it's about economics. He seems to lean toward education being a narrative. Education should be, and he doesn't write in a way where he's trying to solve this problem. He just wants to get the ball rolling about talking about it. And wow, I can't believe we're at 9 minutes, and I feel like I barely begun. This is going to be 6 hours. You better sit and listen. Just kidding. So he thinks education should have a narrative for the student. The student needs to know why they're there. The student needs to know, why am I learning algebra? Why am I learning trigonometry? Why am I learning Shakespeare? Why am I learning biology? Why am I learning ecology? Why am I learning earth science? What's the purpose behind all this stuff? Is this just stuff people think we need to know? I myself, have you, if you're well beyond your high school years, and even well beyond your college years, whether or not you went, how much of the stuff you learned from high school do you use? Well, you probably use very, very little in terms of specific information in the right context. Maybe you use a lot of general know-how that you gain from working hard at being successful at school. Maybe your self-esteem is better because of it. Maybe you realize you can learn a topic that you thought you didn't have interest in. Maybe you learn how to get interested in something that you didn't care for just so you could get a good grade. Maybe you learn how to study. I don't know. There's probably a variety of certain skills that you learned that you wouldn't know if you would have them today had you not gone to school. I mean, that's the other question. Like, I don't know what I would have turned out like had I not ever gone to public school. I had friends who were homeschooled, and they seemed better educated than me in terms of they learned all the same subjects in school, but they also didn't have to deal with all the social stuff in school. And is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Neil Postman thinks that the socializing in school is a good thing. He thinks that students need to learn, people need to learn how to work and relate in a society, how to work together, how to work with other people, how to learn with other people, how to deal with other people. And maybe school does a good job at teaching that. I don't know. That's an unknown. Nobody knows. Nobody really knows because probably the only way you'd ever be able to find out is through statistics. But you'd have to have a specific idea of what is a well-socialized person. Is it a person who follows authority? Is it good to follow authority? Is it bad to follow authority? People have different views on that. Nobody has a scientific answer to this. It's all what everybody thinks is best, and any individual will just be merely anecdotal evidence. It's not going to be fully formed, final evidence. It's not going to be an end of evidence of what education should be. So I think there's a lot of that's very fertile ground for discussing. There are many discussions you can have regarding this book, and I barely scratched the surface. So even though I don't technically remember many details from the book, the more I talk about it, the more I kind of remember impressions that he was trying to make, things you can pull away from it, and a discussion you can have, whether or not you agree with him on particulars. It's interesting to think about. Now, what can you do about it? Nothing. There's literally nothing you can do because Bill Gates will do far more than what you could do, and anybody with a ton of money can influence the system way more. They can be the head of education, Department of Education. They can, a principal or superintendent has far more power over the direction of the school than you do. You can try to get on a school board and see what you can do. I don't know what you can do on a school board, or you can become a teacher yourself and try to convince the students why they need to learn about Korean history or whatever. I remember having to do that, trying to convince students why they needed to know Korean history. Well, it's for the test, right? And that was the only reason. It's because there's a couple questions on the New York State Regents exam about Korea. So, did you know we went to war with them once? What do you know about that war? That we went to war with them. Well, why did we go to war with them? I don't care, and neither do you. So, question number 3, is it worth studying or rereading? No. No, it is not. Because he's not solving a problem, he's merely introducing a problem and trying to get a discussion made. And has that discussion been made since the book was published? I don't know. I don't think the education system has changed. I mean, we have Common Core now, which I don't know much about. I haven't studied it, but I know a lot of people hate it. Education is the kind of institution that simply cannot change very much. It's really wedded to the economic gears that run the machine, so the unions, the administration, taxes available, whatever, physical location, the demographics of the population that go to the school, these things don't really change much. And anybody with radical ideas has too many obstacles to overcome to the point of absurdity. So I'm thinking of, if I remember her name correctly, I think it was Michelle Rhee, who tried to revolutionize the public schools in Washington, D.C., had a lot of good ideas, was big on firing bad teachers, things like that. And she didn't last very long before they got rid of her. And things are not really different there. So you can talk about the end of education in terms of, well, what's the purpose of education? I think the purpose of education is this. I want to really implement this. Good luck. Good luck. So is it worth rereading? Maybe small sections of it, but I will probably never reread it again. I feel like I've gained as much as I can from it just from one reading, a single reading, and thinking about it and talking about it. So it's not the kind of book worth studying or rereading. I read it on my phone, and so I don't have a physical copy, and the copy that I have on my phone is not easy to just look back up. I don't like using technology for reading because I find it just cumbersome to try to look things back up that you found interesting, even if you highlight it and make notes and make bookmarks. I just find it cumbersome. Another point I'd like to make about the book is and this isn't a question I'm asking myself, this is just a point, a thing that stood out to me. I feel like Neil Postman dismissed private education a little too easily. There are many great sources of educating yourself online, and Postman, I don't think, lived long enough to see the internet really mature in the way that one can learn online. So I don't blame him for that, but he was dismissing private schools, and I've thought about this before, like, well, what if we get rid of just public education in general, and all schools will succeed whether or not the students they churn out become successful, and the free market will decide what kind of teaching, what kind of school is most superior. I think at least one state should experiment with that. Experiment with the idea that all public schools will be discontinued. Students will go to private schools. Therefore, if a school wants to, if they want to compete, they're either going to be really expensive and offer some form of education that they'll convince parents to go with, or they'll be dirt cheap and say, hey, we're going to get your kid educated, they're going to be competent, and in areas of life that are necessary to succeed, that have been proven to be necessary to succeed. So they're going to be great communicators, they're going to be great readers, they're going to be great writers, they're going to be logical thinkers, they're going to have some introduction to technical skills, so to some trade skills, to problem solving and business skills. They're going to know some persuasion and sales, like things that might actually help society a bit, as opposed to what some academic thought up of, or some politician thought up of, which, why do we have tests? So we can score the kids on where they're at. And why would we do that? Well, because that's measurable. That's somebody can point to that and say, see, they're doing better. Right? So it's measurable, it's quantifiable, and that's why it's done, because people want to feel like things are improving. So if test scores are improving, why education must be improving. If test scores are suffering, why education must be suffering. And our math and science scores have to be really high for some reason. you can try to be an engineer and not find a job or be replaced by an H-1B visa employee or whatever. But I don't know. I feel like those things are just they're things that are said, like we need more math and science education because it sounds good on the surface. It's very surfacey, very shallow. But the deeper you get, the more you realize vast majority of the population doesn't need to be highly educated in those areas. Certainly because the more people who are highly educated in those areas, the more you cheapen that knowledge, the more supply of knowledgeable math and science people there are, naturally the less value there will be placed on that knowledge because those people are not going to be able to find work for themselves. Another quick sip of water. Sorry for the break. So question number one, finally getting to question number one, which I should mention that the other 4 questions I gave myself were statements I've already discussed. So question number one, what was the conclusion of the book? His conclusion was really short. It wasn't a final thought. It was more an invitation to pick up the ball that he has thrown to you and throw it to somebody else, or dribble it for a while, toss it around, and then toss it to someone else, or toss it back and forth with other people. Maybe something to talk about if you ever do go to your school board meetings, something to think about when your kids are going to school and you want to be somewhat involved in their education. Think about, how important is it that they're learning this? Well, reading, writing, arithmetic, very important. You need those skills in everyday life. But beyond that, all the stuff beyond that, just how important is that? What's the purpose of that? Is there an end to that? Or is it everything in school, are they all means to something and there's no end? There's no, as Neil Postman tries to develop, there's no narrative for the student who's going to school. They don't have a good reason to want to be educated. Okay, so that's kind of maybe the conclusion of his book, is we need as a society, if we're going to have public schools, which we are because nobody's going to be able to get rid of them. Since we have public schools, and since we have not figured out a good narrative for the student, try telling a student to learn a subject because it'll make you more economically viable in society. That's not going to work. That's not going to help him. He's not going to want to be an educated person if that's the story you give him of why he's there. So what is the narrative? What is the reason why the student is there? And the student has to accept this. So the student has to accept why he's being educated. What is it for? He's not going to take education seriously if he thinks that he's there so mommy and daddy can go to work and he's just kind of put there so because he can't stay at home or whatever. Most kids, by the time they get to high school, they think math is a waste of time or science is a waste of time. They don't want to be a scientist. They don't want to be a mathematician. They don't want to be an engineer. They don't want to be a researcher. They don't want to be a statistician. I don't know, whatever jobs are available. They don't want to be a software engineer, whatever, coder. So how do you convince a kid who thinks math is bunk, is worthless? How do you inspire him to want to be educated in math? Well, you have to convince him. Well, if you're good at math, it's not just a career field. Math teaches you symbolic logic, how to problem solve, how to approach problems, how to, you understand the philosophy of numbers, you understand how math through history. Now, you hardly ever learn history while you're learning math, but it'd be good to teach the kid, like, why would we not be where we are today if we didn't use Arabic numerals? If I'm getting that right, like the ones and twos and threes and fours that we see, the symbols written for them that we see today. How come we don't still use? How come we got rid of the Roman numeral way of writing down numbers? Why is it far superior to have 1 through 9 or 0 through 9? And why did the invention of 0, why was that so important? How has that changed life today? That will give the kids something to think about. Well, maybe math is kind of important, because it does, to have some people who are math literate does make society better off. That does give me the luxuries that I have today because people are interested in math. And even though the vast majority of people don't use higher math, you certainly are glad that some people use higher math. So that kind of gives a little bit of a narrative as to why math education could be interesting. I never learned any history of math. I didn't learn the philosophy behind numbers, numerology, if that's the same thing. The importance of symbols. I mean, the actual symbols used in math, the way like an equation is written, the usage of x to indicate a variable, all of these little things that had to be invented over the years to improve the way that we can even think about math. Because if you didn't have those symbols, math would be a lot more difficult. Sorry, one more sip. So I'm just using math because when I took math in high school, I did very well at it. The last math course I actually completed was pre-calc, and I think I got an A. I did very well at it, but I didn't retain any of it, and I didn't understand the purpose of it. I kind of understood slightly, but I didn't see how any of it related to my life or anything I felt like wanting to do, even though there are tons of uses for it, that I couldn't see a purpose behind it. And so when I was taking calculus, I was a few weeks in and I didn't need calculus to graduate. And I thought, why am I going through calculus? I don't even have to take calculus in college because A, I don't have to go to college, and B, I can just take statistics in college. I don't have to take math unless I'm doing a certain kind of course study or a certain degree. So I was a few weeks into calculus, and I was like, I'm dropping this. I dropped the class, and I was so happy that I was done learning math. I mean, so many kids are so happy when they're done learning a certain subject. I'm done with it. It's over. It's gone. Thank God I never have to open a math textbook again in my life. That sense of freedom that kids get when they graduate and they know they don't have to do that stuff anymore is over. It's a wonderful sensation. So many people feel at some point in their life when you know you don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to go to band class anymore. You don't have to suffer through gym class anymore. You don't have to read a boring short story by some person from 60, 70 years ago. So I mean, it's the teacher's job is a difficult one because people just want to get out. They want to they want to pass the test, so they're going to learn enough to pass the test, but they want out. They don't like the subject. They don't want to know the subject. Even if they do, they're still grateful when they're finally done with it. So the narrative, end of education, what kind of narrative can we develop for students today? And I continually think about this myself. Every now and then I'll randomly come up with an idea for like, if I was a teacher still, I would do this in class. And I'll make a separate video about, if even though my degree is in education, there's no hope of being able to get a job in education here in where I live right now, which is Ontario. So but I still think about it. Like, if I were a teacher, how would I do this differently? How would I convince students to not only learn, but how do I convince them to like learning, to enjoy the process? Because learning will never be entertaining. Learning is always has a degree of boringness. Learning is work, right? If you're actually learning, it tends to be work, feel like work. Some learning can be energizing, entertaining. Maybe there's something that you just really love about that certain topic. But in general, learning, like going to the gym, it's work, but then once you've worked through it enough, then you start to enjoy it. You start to enjoy the process, the difficulty, but you have to work your way up to that point. So I feel like I've discussed the book quite a bit. I feel like I have discussed myself out on the subject. I don't really need to talk about it anymore. I don't have any great points left. I could go on and on talking about education in general and the end of education. I think it is very fertile ground for many, many conversations and a lot of thinking, but I think I've done enough for now. And it's something you can think about and bring up as a topic of conversation at some point. It's just interesting to hear different people's ideas of what education is. What do they think the narrative is, and what you have to explain to them what you mean by narrative. Like, why do kids think that they should be educated? What purpose did the children see behind their education other than being told they need to be educated? But it's great for conversation, but the downside is that conversation really worth anything? Yes, you might have an awesome conversation, but wouldn't the point of said conversation be to improve education? But you can't really improve education because the way that it's set up doesn't allow an individual like you to really improve it. You can't choose to put your kid to put your money and your kid toward a different school. In most cases, yes, you can send them to private education, but that's just public education, except more difficult. Yeah. So I'm going to end there. I'm going to end this video. Had a lot of fun talking to you guys, whoever is out there. Yeah, keep it in mind. The End of Education by Neil Postman. It's worth a read. Read it once. You can read it quickly. You don't have to ponderously plow through it one row in the field at a time. I don't know, that's a terrible analogy, but you don't have to take your time with it in order to really get the kind of information you really want from it. It's very stimulating. Neil Postman's books are very stimulating for thought, but after reading 3 of them in a row, I was like, okay, I'm done reading Neil Postman for a while because he was starting to repeat himself. And I talk about this in another video, Benefits of Reading. When you become a critic, it's like if you read the same author, if you read many books by the same author, you see that they repeat themselves a lot. They bring up points that maybe they thought were really good over and over. Even if it's fiction, you kind of see the same thought process behind their writing. And that's why it's interesting to read different people, because everybody thinks differently, they process differently. That's one of the joys of reading. And it's great that Neil Postman put so much thought and time and effort into this book, because you have a stimulating discussion with a very intelligent professor who's thought about this far longer than you most likely have. And that's one of the great benefits of reading, is having these discussions and things to think about and talk about with wonderful, learned people. Okay, Reading Adam here, signing off. Have a great day. Bye.